Welcome to the NBA Trades Podcast. I'm your host, Raphael, and today I have a really special guest. It is a writer who covers the Celtics for The Athletic. It's Jared Weiss. What's up, Jared?
Oh, I'm a really special guest. Now I'm honored to be here.
Well, I mean, you know, like, you out here chilling with Dirk on his final home game, so that's really special, right? Ain't that really special?
Yeah, that I was out there for Dirk's final game. That was one of the most remarkable things I think I've seen in my career. Just the game itself. Jamal Crawford dropping 51, becoming the oldest person ever to drop 50. And then the ceremony after everything that was going on. It was crazy.
And when I saw Sean Kemp there, that was sort of the one that got me like, whoa, this is for real, because it's sort of like you see Larry Bird and you see Charles Barkley, you see them around out and about. Obviously, Charles is on TV. Larry Bird has been president of a team, and Scottie Pippen's on TV. So you see these guys, and you're sort of you're amazed that they're there. But to me, I haven't seen Sean Kemp in ages, and so to see Sean Kemp on the floor, the fact that the Mavericks were able to get him, that was pretty spectacular and really amazing for Dirk. Especially, I didn't realize how much of a liking he took towards Sean Kemp's game, and especially because of how different their games are. It's really unique and also reflective of also Sean Kemp's impact on the 90s and just sort of how he was that dominant and that crazy on the court. In a good way. I say crazy in a good way.
It's funny. I feel like he was like the forgotten guy of the 90s because he was super impactful, made a finals with Gary Payton. And I mean, now if he was in the league now, I feel like he would be looked at as one of the top 5 players in the league just because of the way his skill set would fit the modern game even more so than back then. And I think he'd be a better shooter now. So, you know, whatever. But he's like that guy that just kind of like just slips through the cracks of the elite 90s players. And, you know, I think that was the first time I've seen him since he retired.
Yeah, and I feel like for me too, that was the first time I've ever seen him out and about in public since he retired. Maybe like one of those documentaries or whatever, but he might have spoken it. But you're right about that in terms of just how he is sort of forgotten. And I think some of it has to do with just sort of how his career sort of completely fell apart towards the end. And by the time that he had accomplished what he had accomplished, all those All-NBA teams and All-Star appearances in the mid-90s, and then he goes to Cleveland, and then it just all sort of goes south. Everything just sort of went bad, but still, it is crazy, and I feel like there's a lot more appreciation for him now because of like his highlights and just some of the dunks and all that acrobatic stuff has sort of been really in the Instagram, YouTube world. Putting together a Sean Kemp highlight package is very easy. And it's made him very, I think, in terms of like younger people being able to see him and sort of understand. Because for me, I never really grew up with watching him because by the time I really was watching basketball, I was 8 or 9. And so he was towards the end of his career. Or not at the end, but he was in Cleveland and he wasn't as athletic and he had gotten a little heftier. And so he wasn't able to do the things that he had done in Seattle previously. So for me, it's a way to at least recognize how good of a player he was. And I've also watched some of his old games, and he was a beast. And there were a lot of dunks. That's all I could say. So we're here to talk about the Celtics, the NBA, the playoffs. The playoffs are here. It's finally here after a long, arduous road of I don't know, a lot of drama starting from the Jimmy Butler days in October and in training camp. And we went through a lot all the way up until Magic Johnson ending his tenure with the Lakers. I don't know. It was very confusing. But just going through this whole season, there was a lot to digest. And the Celtics were at the center of a lot of the, not necessarily that kind of drama in the way that I'm talking about, but the season was a lot of interesting moments, and I think we have to start with Kyrie. Kyrie Irving is the first person to think about. And his season was, individually, it was great. the Celtics were expected to win. I mean, people were saying they were going to win 65 to 67 games and have the best record in the NBA. They finished with 49 wins, fourth in the East. And there's a lot of disappointment with just sort of how the team played this year, how they were not able to dominate in the way that maybe people expected. Milwaukee sort of took over, I think, where where people thought Boston was going to be. And I mean, the Kyrie situation, is he going to leave? Is he going to go in free agency? Became such a big topic of discussion. Kyrie was annoyed at the world, at everyone, and it was pretty dramatic. All of the stories that came out. What was it like covering Kyrie this year, and just sort of the mood swings and the moodiness that sort of, from my vantage point as somebody on the outside, seeing everything that happened? What was it like covering him this year?
I don't think it was quite as insane as people from the outside think of it, because we deal with him on a daily basis, in which there's a lot of days where he's just like pretty normal, or I guess relatively normal for the way that he carries himself. But so it's not all just the real big highs and the big lows, which is what it's like for everybody on the outside. Or I'd say maybe more so people watching from afar rather than like people really like close to the Celtics or like Celtics fans and stuff like that, because you're only really hearing about Kyrie when it's Kyrie said something crazy, or Kyrie is calling out his team, or Kyrie is talking about calling LeBron or whatever. But things with him happen enough that it feels like a roller coaster. So it's been incredibly erratic. That's the thing, is people ask me all the time about like, do you hate Kyrie? Which obviously I don't. I don't know why people ask that. Like,
it's a hilarious question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is a legitimate question, but like Kyrie's not a jerk to me, at least. I've seen him call out people for bad questions, but I think he respects good questions, and he's been great. He's been great with me, actually. I don't ask him a lot of questions, but when I do, he almost always has been really great and seems to respect the questions I ask him. And I try to make sure that they're good, thoughtful questions, obviously. But so, I think Kyrie's someone who recognizes real when he occasionally gets to encounter it, but he has to deal with a lot of BS all the time. And I definitely empathize with where he's coming from a lot of the time. And I recognize that he's just basically someone who he's trying to be as woke as possible, which means not playing to any of the BS that is part of the industry, not placating to people wanting him to say the right thing and stuff like that. I think he's trying to keep it real as much as possible. And like we learned from Dave Chappelle, sometimes keeping it real goes wrong. And Dave Chappelle taught us a lot of great lessons about how to handle the media in the NBA. And Kyrie just sometimes tries to keep it real too often, or just doesn't want to play along with stuff that he should play along with, because it's not about the public. It's really about his teammates. It's really about the team that he's trying to lead. And a big part of leadership is being willing to swallow your pride and swallow your values for the betterment of the group and for the long-term goal. And I feel like sometimes he hasn't done that, even though he's someone who constantly talks about the long-term goal. So, Kyrie, I actually admire and like a lot of what he does, but I think he also makes a lot of mistakes. People that say he's a terrible leader are people that don't really know what they're talking about and don't really pay attention closely enough to really know what's going on. They only see the big storylines that come out. So, I think that Kyrie is definitely the most controversial leader in the NBA. Probably LeBron, I guess, is ahead of him on that one. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. And I think we're not going to really know that answer until we see what happens in the playoffs, whether or not it really is bad.
I agree. I mean, it's funny that you said that he's woke and he tries to say to be real and keep it real, and in a lot of ways that is what has gotten him in the media news cycle, or the national NBA news cycle, with whatever comments he makes. But I generally do appreciate a lot of his honesty about certain things. Like, I felt, as an example, his Kevin Durant situation, when the photograph of him at All-Star Weekend talking, or the video of him at All-Star Weekend talking with Kevin Durant in like a hallway, and people were sort of trying to interpret it as they're talking about free agency, and he's trying to be honest about how he feels. For me, I can appreciate that he wants to be honest and keep it real that, hey, like, we're just talking, we're friends, and all this speculation about it is sort of silly when you think about it. Because, I mean, just even from my vantage point, from that view, me saying, oh, why would they be talking about free agency right before the All-Star game in, like, the hallway? Like, I mean, they're friends. They could be talking about anything. And I can understand his frustration with certain things like that, but that also is sort of part of the game as a superstar in this league. When you're considered a superstar, these types of situations are going to happen.
You know what's funny about that scene was that, most of us on the Celtics beat didn't really say anything when that video came out. When I saw that video came out, I tweeted out, it said, like, confirmation bias would show that he's saying two max slots, but logic would dictate that why would they ever say that? But reason is saying who the hell knows what's going on at this point. And I was making the point of basically that, like, people want to see what they want to see, but you got to think about what makes sense in that moment. And then considering everything that happens to Kyrie, it's like, I don't really know what's going on, so what's the point of all this? And the next day he comes out, has that press conference, and the person asking him the question, who is Steve Bulpett, who's been the Celtics beat writer for the Boston Herald for, like, forever. I want to say 35. I think it's like 35 to 38 years. Like, he covered Danny Ainge when Danny was a player. He's been there forever. And so he's seen these types of news cycles play out over and over and over again for decades. And Steve basically, like, said to him, like, hey, this video, do you want to pour some cold water on it? Like, he literally was just saying to Kyrie, like, because Steve Bulpett is the kind of guy who, like, thinks all that stuff is BS. Thinks everything is BS, really. And so...
Oh, sorry. I think I have something... Okay, sorry.
Yeah. By the way,
there's an alarm. So the Celtics, they had it was a disappointing season, I guess, in terms of just the record overall, but they still were pretty solid on both ends of the court when you look at, offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency. And at times they struggled at points on both sides of the court, especially early on in the season. The offense was a problem, and they sort of righted the ship at times, and I guess it was just they were sort of inconsistent. What do you make out of that season, and just sort of what happened with just how they performed overall?
Well, they had a very unique combination of talents on board, and I think that we expected before the season a degree of harmony and coherence that just wasn't even close. And there were some people that warned of that, and I'll give them credit. They were right. I ignored it just because of everything that I'd seen up until that point, of how much success that Stevens had in putting these teams together. So I was really shocked by that, and I still am to this day. But guys like Terry Rozier and Jason Tatum throughout the year have just really struggled to figure out how to fit into this offense and kind of have the patience to wait for their shots to come to them naturally. I think Tatum has figured it out to a pretty strong degree. Rozier hasn't, and Rozier is in a situation where he has to put up numbers to get himself money this offseason, so that was never a solution that was going to work. And people in his camp were always telling me, like, oh, it's going to work itself out, and I kept telling them, no, it's not. It's you can't just, like, say, oh, it's going to be fine. Like, there's not going to be enough touches. It's going to be an issue. Celtics fans have really soured on him, which is just really sad because he's been awesome for this team. He's such a warrior. The fact that he didn't demand a trade is actually pretty remarkable because, like, every other guy in his position pretty much over the years has demanded a trade, like Reggie Jackson, like all those kind of guys, So that was surprising that he at least has held it together, and it's worked out for him. And that was smart, being out for the first round or maybe round and a half to 2 rounds of the playoffs. Terry's going to get a lot more opportunity. He's probably going to be playing 30 minutes a game. Should be a much better situation for him.
Yeah, and I feel like that should be an interesting part of it, especially with Marcus Smart being injured, which we'll talk about a little bit. But, I mean, there's a chance for him to play more even with Kyrie I'm guessing probably just because of Smart not being there in the first round and them needing someone to fill in for him at times or fill in for those minutes that Smart isn't playing. And I mean, his season, it has been disappointing, and I feel like he had, like you said, he has sort of cost himself in this situation in terms of just free agency and what's going to happen for him in terms of who's like going to sign him or who's going to go after him, and can he be a starting point guard in this league? And I think that this season probably created that question again, because I felt like after their playoff run last year, there was a feeling like he should be a starting point guard, or he could be a starting point guard on any team besides the Celtics, and not any team because that's sort of a stretch, but that he could be a starting point guard. Do you think that he's going to be a starting point guard wherever he ends up down the road, or do you think he's sort of now stuck in this situation where he's going to be like a backup point guard?
I think he's going to be a starter again. I think that there's a couple teams that are probably going to target him. Phoenix has long been after him, and I wouldn't be surprised if Phoenix has made it clear to him that they're going to be pursuing him in free agency hard. But they're a team that seems like they could offer him a starting role. I mean, a lot of it has to do with where Ja Morant ends up. If he ends up with Phoenix, then I don't think they're going to get Rozier. It seems pointless at that point. But, Orlando was a team that was thought to be, I mean, we know that they were after Rozier. Then they got Markelle Fultz. Not really sure if that really makes that much of an impact on that situation, because Fultz, one, could probably play next to Rozier, and two, is like also just a huge question mark for whether he returns. And so, but Orlando made the playoffs, so they're no longer going to be having a top pick, which means that Rozier could be their guy. And it just also means that they know that they have to get a point guard through free agency. And hey, it's impressive that they've gone this far without like a really good point guard. But they know that they're going to have, that's like probably their biggest area of need this offseason. So there's a couple teams out there that, I mean, the funny thing is there's not a lot of teams that don't have a point guard. Like most teams have one. I don't know if they're not going to have the cap. They're going to have cap space. So I'm trying to think of who else could potentially have the cap space and has needed a point guard. I feel like most of the teams though that have cap space just don't have a need a point guard right now.
Yeah, I think that's like the hard part about it, because the NBA at point guard is such a hard, spot to crack a starting rotation. There's so many solidified or like star kind of players, or they're just young guys like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander who are establishing themselves as sort of the future of whatever franchise they're on, and putting themselves in a position where it's a team's not going to pursue a veteran or another point guard to start, especially if the keys have been handed to them. So for the playoffs, the Celtics are matched up with the Pacers in the first round, and it should be a fun series. The Celtics beat the Pacers 3-1 in the regular season series. Obviously, that Kyrie Irving shot in the third game in Boston, where he tricked Miles Turner and got all the way to the rim and made a layup to give the Celtics ended up becoming the game-winning layup. And they also blew out the Pacers 2 separate times. They lost. The one loss came on a Victor Oladipo 3 late, and obviously Victor Oladipo's not going to be there for the Pacers in the first round. The Celtics are heavily favored in this series, even without Marcus Smart, who has a oblique injury and is expected, like you had previously mentioned, that he's going to miss at least the first round and maybe part of the second round. He's somebody who's a quick healer. He always gets back sooner than the initial timetable. He's somebody who always gets back. So I wouldn't be shocked if he's back sometime, early in the second round, just because of who he is as a person, as a player. Marcus Smart definitely gets after it. But I think what's interesting, especially in the last game that these two teams played each other in Indiana, the game that essentially decided home court advantage, or played a big factor in home court advantage throughout the first round. And Marcus Smart was matched up on Bojan Bogdanovic, the Pacers' best offensive player right now, with Oladipo out for the season. And he really just completely stymied Bogdanovic. The Pacers run a lot of off the ball action for him, running him off of screens, running him off of pin downs, trying to get him some easy looks because he's not necessarily the greatest shot creator with the ball. Well, he's not a great shot creator with the ball, but he has gotten a little bit better at it. And
I think he's good, actually.
yeah, and Smart really just blew up so many of those screen plays or some of those screen actions for the Pacers. There were just several moments where, Bogdanovich might try and slip to the rim and Smart was just tailing him and just completely, just his ability to guard bigger players. It makes it so hard for someone like Bogdanovich, who's not necessarily someone who gets to the free throw line a lot, to be able to be successful consistently. And I do think that in Smart being injured, that is one factor that does help the Pacers in that series. What do you think about Marcus Smart's impact on the Celtics this season and just going forward in the playoffs, how much him not playing will hurt them?
Well, first off, when Marcus Smart hit free agency, I thought their goal was going to be $12 million. That was kind of the sense I was getting from his camp. Was they wanted $12 million a year, that Danny wanted to pay 9 to 10 if they were going to keep him. They ended up at 13.5, I believe. And a lot of people looked at that and thought, wow, Marcus Smart is getting overpaid. And after seeing him this year, Marcus Smart's probably worth like almost $20 million a year. I mean, he was incredible this year. He's going to be first team all defense. He's going to be probably 4th or 5th in defensive player of the year voting, which, he probably would have been at that level for a couple years, but just last year he missed a lot of games, so he didn't get it then. And then before that, he was coming off the bench and just wasn't playing enough minutes. But this year, I think he played like 32 minutes a game, so he qualified. He was amazing. I mean, he was better than ever defensively. I think he's actually gotten better, which is hard to imagine because, a lot of these like natural defensive savant guys like him, they're usually like great coming into the league defensively. And then they have to learn just how to play help defense and handle different pick and roll schemes and stuff like that. But like he was great almost immediately. It was kind of shocking. And he really started to hit it. He really like hit that ascended to that pinnacle like year 3 or so of his career. But we're seeing in year 5, he's just gotten better because he's improved in like that area that you're talking about there, being able to chase shooters over screens, something that I don't think he was quite as good at a couple years ago. That now he's probably the best in the league at, and that's why he's so great on JJ Redick. He's so great on Bogdanovich and all these kind of guys. And so he was able to do stuff like that. He's become a better playmaker. He's kind of started to figure out how he can finish in the paint because he's really, really struggled with that throughout his career. And then, of course, he became a league average 3-point shooter, which, when you add everything that he does, makes him a pretty deadly player. So he was, without a doubt, the 3rd best player on the Celtics this year. And even if Jason Tatum really played up to his potential, and even if Jaylen Brown had a much more balanced season, because Jaylen Brown ended up having a really solid year. Just nobody really noticed it because people don't really notice what happens after the narrative is set at the beginning of the year. But Marcus was like clearly the 3rd best player on this team and is without a doubt the heart and soul of this team. Al Horford is the quiet engine, but Marcus Smart is the heart of the team. And they can get past Indy with him just because, they've demonstrated that they match up really well against Indy. Smart isn't really vital to the matchup in this series because Jaylen Brown can replace that Bogdanovich matchup, and because Indiana doesn't really have the perimeter versatility that would make Smart as vital. But if they make it to Milwaukee, I don't think there's any way they could beat Milwaukee with the way Milwaukee's been playing, unless like Brogdon really isn't healthy yet and Giannis is having a sore ankle still and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that is probably the course of just how it's going to work out. They really do need him to get back for the second round. I mean, I looked up the statistics, and their current starting lineup before Smart got injured, the lineup that they started with for the recently has been Irving, Kyrie Irving, Marcus Smart, Jason Tatum, Al Horford, and Aaron Baines. Aaron Baines has been a beast, by the way. And so in 64 minutes this season, that group is plus 27.2 points per 100 possessions, outscoring the opponents so far in just 64 minutes. And so when you replace Marcus Smart, and they really haven't used this starting lineup with Baines and Horford with some of those other wings, Jaylen Brown has gotten the most minutes with that other foursome replacing Smart, and they're negative 4.8 points per 100 possessions, but it's just 25 minutes. Hayward and Rozier have both played less than 6 minutes together with that group of four, so it's sort of hard to really evaluate, so I'm not even going to bring up the numbers. But it shows that they really found their groove with that starting lineup, and Baines has been really good, by the way. Just, I can't deny that. And for some reason, this Horford-Baines lineup really works well this season. I mean, what happened? Horford wasn't doing this with Zaza Pachulia 10 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, they have what they need right now, so I think they'll be okay for now. And, Horford in the playoffs, he always steps up like crazy. That's a big thing for them, and why I think I'd be pretty confident for them in the first round.
Yeah, I feel really confident for them too as well. I feel like one of the biggest problems for the Pacers in this series is the starting lineup. The Celtics are doing, and a lot of teams have done this in the second half of the season, or even just throughout this whole season. They will put their center on Thaddeus Young because he's not a great three-point shooter. He's always been a very below-average three-point shooter, somewhere in the low 30s usually, or high 20s. And so, that happened in these previous two matchups. Aaron Baines guarded that and pretty much acted like he wasn't even on the court in any pick and roll that the Pacers ran with Thaddeus Young as a screener. And so Horford guarded Miles Turner, who's the Indiana center and has become a very good three-point shooter. He shot 38% this season. And so the Celtics have the more mobile Horford to stick with Miles. And Miles isn't really a threat in terms of just taking someone off the dribble. He's gotten a little bit better, being able to drive and maybe, pump fake and drive and make a play. But still, I don't trust that in a playoff series, especially against the defender with the capabilities of Al Horford. And so I just feel like naturally that just really just will gum up their offense, just having that out there. But he's such an important and integral part of what Indiana does that they sort of do need to have him on the court because he's one of their best defenders. And he does a good job. But then even then on defense, he's matched up with Horford most of the time. And that's a really tough ask because of Horford's just size advantage in that mismatch.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, Thad Young has turned into a really good defender. He's one of the best forward defenders in the NBA. Yeah. Him and Bogdanovich, what they did last year against LeBron is unforgettable. And he's continued to exhibit that defensive versatility and dominance ever since then, so this year. So I think he can handle Horford for the most part. I think the vulnerability will be that Horford likes to throw his shoulder into guys on the block and then get that hook shot off. That's probably the one thing that Thad can't really help with, but he can help in every other regard.
Yeah, I think that deserves some all-defensive team recognition. I mean, the Pacers were top 3 in defense this year, one of the best, and he played a really big part just being able to do so many things on the defensive end, create turnovers, which was a big key in the Pacers early on, having at least a decent league average type of offense because they were able to create fast break opportunities and points off turnovers. And just also his ability to guard different positions, guarding Giannis at times this year, and guarding LeBron, and guarding everybody pretty much, and also being consistent, being able to stay on the court. He played in 81 games before sitting out the season finale. I mean, I feel like with this matchup too, the Celtics, Kyrie really went off in the last game, even with a solid defensive point guard, or not even solid, an above average defensive point guard in Corey Joseph, probably one of the better defensive point guards in the league, guarding him, and they were able to get a lot of opportunities, especially in the first quarter for Kyrie, just off the ball, running him off screens and pistol action, and I'm interested to see just how the Pacers guard him in this series, especially with Darren Collison starting, who's a much smaller point guard, not the defender that Corey Joseph is. And that does create a little weird issue just because Collison is a much better offensive player in terms of just creating his own shot, which the Pacers are going to need a little bit, someone who can, create their own shot which I think was a problem in the most recent game at Indiana. But Joseph is their best defensive perimeter player, but offensively he's really struggled over the past couple months. How do you think Kyrie's going to play in this series? Do you think he's going to show out and show improve?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, after everything that he's been saying this year, he needs to come out and light it up in game one, because he's been like, of all the BS that, of all the BS that he's been talking about, and I say that remembering what I was saying earlier about him, but like one thing that he's done that I think is complete BS is every time he's asked about the regular season, he's like, none of this matters. It's all about the playoffs. And that's like kind of true, but it's also complete BS. It's like he's basically trying to brush off whatever mistakes he makes or whatever poor management decision that he does by just saying, oh, but it doesn't matter. It's the playoffs is what matters. So, now he needs to come out there and play perfect basketball in the playoffs to hold himself to the standard that he has been holding himself to. It's not even like a matter of living up to expectations. It's like this is what he has been saying is his standard. So, I mean, Corey Joseph is a good defensive point guard. And actually, I think he's a better matchup overall against the Celtics than Collison is, on both sides. I think that the speed that he can attack downhill with and be able to nash the ball under the rim, where you, as a point guard, you keep running past the rim and you kind of do a big loop and then you're able to find more plays out of that. That, which I'm explaining for the audience. But I think that is actually a tougher matchup for the Celtics to handle than Collison just being able to come over the top and shoot a mid-range pull-up, which those are the kind of shots they want to give up.
Yeah, I mean that's like literally Collison's game at this point is just get a screen, the big sags back, and then he just shoots a mid-range pull-up. That's what you're going to see a lot in this series, unfortunately, if you're expecting an offensive showcase. So for this team, Hayward has been really interesting. Gordon Hayward, he's become really fiery in terms of just his performances. He's getting into the lane, making shots, tough shots, contested shots too. And he shot really well. Obviously, he had the perfect game against the Pacers and had a bunch of other big performances recently. It seems like that he's going to be back in full force, and he's really getting back to who he was as an all-star before he suffered that gruesome injury last year. What impact can he have? I'm expecting that he's probably going to come off the bench in the playoffs. I'm guessing Jaylen Brown's going to start. He could really I felt like just watching him play in that last game against the Pacers, it really showed to me that he could really impact the series. Not even just the Pacers one, but if the Celtics are able to get past Milwaukee or they're able to get deeper into the playoffs, that he could really just be a game changer, having a guy like that off the bench who's been an all-star.
Yeah, well, I feel like we've been saying throughout the year, Gordon Hayward's back. And then you just have to keep adding an extra C to that. So he's back at this point. Because, before he was back to being good. And then lately he's been back to being like a full-fledged, all-around playmaker. But then the question will be in the playoffs, can he, really carve a defense apart against a starting unit defense, because he sometimes a lot of the time gets to go up against second unit defenses, and I think second units tend to lose their defensive capability more than their offensive capability on average. But so in the playoffs, there's not really a lot of second unit defenses. Like, teams are staggering their players more. The rotations are tighter to an 8-man rotation usually. Indiana's probably going to have an 8-man rotation, and maybe Doug McDermott will play. So, Doug McDermott plays, Gordon Hayward's going to score 20 a game because he literally eats McDermott alive every time these teams face off. And when Hayward went 9 for 9 in that last game in Indiana, most of it was him just kind of getting off-ball screen, wide pin downs to lose McDermott. McDermott would be taken out of the play. Sabonis would have to step up to try to play him in no man's land. He would either get by Sabonis or he'd slip a pocket pass to rolling Daniel Tice, stuff like that. So it's kind of child's play for him. McDermott's out there. If it's Thad Young guarding him or Wes Matthews guarding him, that's going to be more of a challenge. But yeah, he's been good. He has been very, very good lately.
Yeah, I'm like I texted our friend Alex, our mutual friend Alex, that if Hayward plays like that, then maybe they. And this was before Marcus Smart's injury, so that might have changed it. But I was sort of like, if he plays like this, they might get to the finals. But I mean, now I don't know how I feel after Marcus's injury. But I'm really interested to see what happens with the Celtics, especially down the road in the playoffs. What would I mean from how the team's perspective is on this season, especially just how the regular season ended up playing out? Do they have an expectation for what they want to achieve in the playoffs? I know that they still think finals, but I mean, it'd be very hard to beat Milwaukee and then Toronto on the road, most likely, depending on if Toronto loses to, or even if they play Philadelphia in the conference finals. Philadelphia would have home court advantage as well. It'd be very hard to beat two of those three teams on the road in two consecutive playoff series. How do the Celtics feel about their expectations that they, the in season, the start of the season expectations that people were saying they were going to get to the finals and be the favorite, to where they are now as being essentially an underdog when they most likely get past this Pacers team in the first round?
I won't say most likely, but I think I have the, well, we can do picks at the end, so I won't say what I have them as, but excuse me, I don't think they would get past Milwaukee with the way things have been going, but they have that gear that they can reach where they can be better than Milwaukee. Milwaukee's a little bit exposed right now with the injuries that they have. I mean, so is Boston, obviously. So if they're at full strength with Smart, Hayward's playing at an all-star level, Kyrie and Horford have everything going, and Tatum and Brown are clicking well, then yeah, that team is the most talented team in the Eastern Conference, most likely, and they could do it. But it's like before this Indiana series starts, you're just kind of, you have no idea. You're just shooting in the dark because, I'm just shooting in the dark because, like, this team has shown three different types of Celtics teams. It's the Celtics team that can put up some nice numbers, but then they kind of fall apart and they let the other team back in. There's a team that just doesn't show up, and then there's a team that fights with blood and they execute on offense and they're hitting their shots and they end up beating the Warriors, or they end up beating the Bucks or the Sixers, but not the Raptors because they just can't beat the Raptors. So, that's the problem though for them, is if they get to the conference finals and they face Toronto. Toronto's had the upper hand on them. I mean, I talked to people on the team who have told me that Toronto's like that's their big matchup nightmare. That's the hardest team for them to match up with.
Yeah, I agree, because it's just that team is so just really tough, especially adding Marc Gasol has like completely just changed just the look of the team from where they were, and also his abilities are just so different from Valanciunas, being able to shoot threes but also being able to make decisions out of the pick and roll. So I guess we'll just go into, as a final point, like you said, the predictions for this first round series. I'll start. I'll just say it. The Pacers are going to put up a fight. I don't think it's going to be like what maybe some people think it might be, easy or whatever. But I say it's probably going to go 7 games, and the Celtics win Game 7 at home. I think the Pacers will fight, and they will play very, very hard. That's one thing that those Nate McMillan teams do. They always compete. But some of the points I made, the Thaddeus Young existence being guarded by a center like Aaron Baines or Daniel Tice, will make it really hard for the Pacers to consistently get their offense going. And I do wonder if that will cause more of a Domantas Sabonis appearance. I mean, he plays a lot already as their 6th man, but just as becoming maybe having to play him more, because the Celtics might have to be forced to play a true big on Sabonis because of his post-up ability. He's a much better post player than Miles Turner. So we'll see, but I would say 7. I mean, the Pacers will give them a fight, but their offense is just going to be a problem. And their defense also has to step up. They haven't played good defense over the past, I'd say, 10 to 15 games. So we'll see. What's your prediction?
I have the Celtics in the 6 because, if you look at Indiana the last month and a half, they've actually been like 21st in net rating. They have not been good. We saw in those last 2 games there, which I think were very indicative of what this playoff series is going to be like, that Indiana at their best can really, really take it to Boston. They can score. They can shoot with them. They can abuse them with high-low game. If they can figure out a way to use Sabonis and Turner out there and still defend well, I think that'll be a massive issue for the Celtics because both those guys can pick and pop for 3. They can both score underneath. They can grab offensive rebounds. They can win the tip game. I mean, those guys, the Celtics just don't match up with well at all when they're down low. So, Indiana has the capability to pull off a few games here, and I think it'll be a tight wire-to-wire series, and the Celtics might have one like big blow. I feel like maybe it'll be tied 2-2 coming back to Boston, and the Celtics just blow them out in Game 5, and then Indiana just kind of loses their fight there. But the Celtics just have too much offensive talent. They don't have a rhythm, but a lot of their players have a rhythm. And the Celtics never have a rhythm as a team. It's always some of the guys on the team have a rhythm, and that's why they're winning. But when it's the playoffs, so many of these issues about different matchup issues, about not showing up, about schedule, about the players that they're facing, that all goes by the wayside. Like that doesn't really apply in the playoffs when it's no back-to-backs. You're scheming for one team, especially with Stevens, who's been great with mid-series adjustments over the years. A lot of those problems should go away, and once those problems go away, this team could be just as good as all the other teams in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, it should be a fun. First of all, it should be a fun playoffs overall. I think that there are a lot of great matchups throughout the first round, including Philly and Brooklyn, and some of the other ones on the Western bracket. San Antonio and Denver is one that interests me. But it's going to be a fun series. I think that the Celtics Pacers, if you enjoy that old school, maybe this will be a throwback to 1998 where the score, I'm just joking, it's not going to be 72 to 70. But if you want a competitive series with a lot of physicality, then you're going to expect that. And it might be some really slog type of moments with the Pacers struggling to score, but we'll see what happens. Jared, where can the people follow you on Twitter?
Don't follow me.
Why not? What?
No,
You don't have any Too Many Cooks references on?
Man, that song is still stuck in my head from that weekend. It's crazy.
Oh my! I heard it referenced on another podcast. I think it was Ethan Strauss's podcast, and I remember. And I heard it, and I thought about instantly from just what had happened a month ago.
I thought of you in the minivan on the side of the cliff immediately, which I'm sure all of the audience will totally understand. Oh. Basically, long story short, we rented a cabin up in the mountains in North Carolina, and the road to the cabin was literally just like a cobblestone road on the side of a cliff with like no barrier, and we almost fell off the cliff, and it was pretty wild. And we were playing Too Many Cooks the entire time.
Yes, and if there was any time I feared for my life, maybe that might have been the time that I thought about it.
At least you were in
the good car. Yeah, I was in the good car, so it's all good. So at least I felt a little bit more reassured being in the good car. And by the way, NBA news, I guess you know why I'm on the NBA Trades podcast. It's not a trade because there are no trades happening, but Luke Walton is no longer head coach of the Lakers. They've decided to mutually part ways, so that just came out. Shams broke that news, so NBA.
I like how Shams reported that they've parted ways, and then he quote tweeted it saying, and they mutually parted ways.
Yes. You got to make sure you add the mutually, because you know what? It's about leverage in this NBA. Or or respect. I guess it's respect, right? Because Jeannie Buss has a lot of respect for Luke and doesn't want to let him go out like that. Like, we fired yo ass, pretty much. She doesn't want to make it sound like that. So,
well, the statements from Rob Pelinka saying, we'd like to thank Luke for his dedicated service over the last 3 years. We wish Luke and his family the best of luck moving forward. So Good job, Magic, saving Luke his job by resigning instead. Great work.
Yeah, he gave him 48 hours or like 43.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Well, I
43
mean,
hours.
okay. Well, Luke put a statement in here in this press release, so it definitely was a mutual parting of ways.
Yeah. Okay, so let's wrap it up. This is the NBA Trades Podcast. I'm your host, Raphael. Thank you, Jared, for coming on. Check out Jared's work at The Athletic. You should subscribe if you haven't to The Athletic. They have great deals. It is definitely worth it in terms of the coverage of the NBA. But even outside of the NBA, they have great coverage on football, baseball, etc., etc. If you just like sports, then you definitely should subscribe. But also, if you like the NBA, then you have to subscribe to The Athletic. They cover the league great on every region, every location, every team you could imagine has somebody covering it. So you definitely have to check it out. And yeah,
appreciate that.
Yeah, and that's the NBA Trades Podcast. I'm your host, Raphael. Peace out.
Peace.
This has been another edition of the NBA Trades Podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, on Google Play, on Stitcher, and it's also on YouTube. So check it out. And thank you for listening. Leave a review or a rating that will really help